With that, Madam Chair, I think we're ready to call this meeting to order.
With that, Director Gray, I'm going to go ahead and do the roll call, if that's okay.
Please.
Thank you. Director Williams, Director Alvarez, Director Deere, Director Houston,
Here.
and Director Gray.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum of the committee.
Thank you very much, Julie. Go ahead,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Welcome to the Water Planning and Legislation Committee meeting for today. And Assistant General Manager EJ, or someone who is there in charge, please take over.
No problem, Madam Chair. This is
Thank
EJ
you.
joining you to help lead this meeting. The next item that we have on the agenda is our public comment. And I do not see any member of the public that has joined us yet. But if anybody would like to make public comment, if you could please indicate so by raising your hand on the electronic function. Seeing and hearing none, we will move on with the agenda. The next item is presentations under item number 4. Staff has no presentations for you at this time. That would bring us to action calendar and under item 5, and we do not have any action calendar items, which brings us to our information calendar. And the first item that we have for you today is a summary of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And for this overview, we do have our water policy analyst, Matt Bay, for the presentation.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, Director Gray, Director Houston. I'm on page 3 of the agenda packet, and I'll be providing an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which is a comprehensive climate, healthcare, and tax legislative package that the Congress passed over the past couple of weeks, and which President Biden actually signed into law yesterday. So the legislation, which is a much pared down version of the Build Back Better Act, which you might recall they were trying to push through in conjunction with the infrastructure, Infrastructure Act that passed in 2020-2021. It's expected to generate nearly $750 billion in revenue and to make expenditures of about $430 billion, with the majority of that, $370 billion, going toward numerous climate change and energy programs. So this is a really big milestone for President Biden and the administration. I included a couple of attachments in the packet that provide a general overview of the provisions of the bill, and also some excerpts from the legislative text that are specific to drought mitigation and water supply projects. So I won't go into detail on all of the bill's provisions. There's plenty of media coverage out there on that, of the legislation, that provides a good overview of it. But I did want to cover just some of the areas that are more directly related to West Basin and the water industry at large. So first off, there was $4 billion with a B, billion, in drought mitigation funding that was included in the act. Now, this funding wasn't originally included in the bill, but in order to gain passage, in order to get some of the Western senators on board, including Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona, it was eventually added to the bill in order to help Western states that are being impacted by the record low conditions on the Colorado River basin, as well as some of the other basins in the West that are experiencing similar levels of drought conditions. So including that $4 billion in the bill is ultimately what allowed the Senate to pass a bill on a 51 to 50 vote, with Vice President Kamala Harris providing the deciding vote. So up until that point, there was kind of I would say, a little funding in the bill for addressing some of the climate change impacts in the West from a water perspective. So this was a very good thing for California and other Colorado River dependent states that the amendments were negotiated and secured. And you know, they're included in the final version that President Biden signed. So the funding will be administered by the Bureau of Reclamation, and it's broken down into 3 different funding categories. The first is compensation to farmers for voluntary cuts in water use, and a lot of people think that this will take up a lot of the money because there's a lot of potential for saving water that way. The second category is for grants and other financial assistance to water agencies for system conservation projects. Now, this is the funding category that West Basin is most likely to pursue, potentially for our grass replacement program or for other district conservation projects that we might implement in the future. And then the third and final category of the drought mitigation is some environmental restoration projects on rivers and inland water bodies, with the Salton Sea being a major beneficiary of that funding category. So Bureau of Rec will have until September 30th of 2026 to spend the funding, and they will have pretty broad discretion in establishing the funding guidelines and overall implementation of the funding program. So we don't know quite yet how much funding will be allocated to that category that will go towards conservation projects, but once that is determined, we'll evaluate all opportunities to apply for that funding. Another big part of the legislative package that relates to water that will be also carried out by Bureau of Rec is they have $550 million for disadvantaged communities to plan and construct water projects that will provide domestic water supplies to communities or households that don't have reliable access to drinking water. So again, Bureau of Rec will come up with the criteria that defines who and which areas will be eligible for that funding. I think that it will likely be focused on a lot of the communities in the San Joaquin Valley or some of the other parts of the state that have, those unreliable water supplies, but we'll check to see what Bureau of Rec does with that, and if any of the communities in our service area would be eligible for that, for those funds. There's also more than $50 billion in general environmental justice funding that's targeted for disadvantaged communities to build infrastructure and programs that address climate change and mitigate health impacts. So not just from a water perspective, but from clean energy, from solar, things of that nature. They want to try to get those kinds of programs in those communities. So again, this is another area where we're going to track it. We're going to work with our other local government agencies in our service area to see if there's opportunities for them to apply and for us to participate in that process or to support their efforts to apply for funding. As I mentioned, the bill is now signed into law, so it's now kind of in the hands of Bureau of Rec and others to develop the funding plan. So we'll be sure to keep you apprised of any noteworthy developments with regard to the water-related funding programs. And with that, please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Matt, for that presentation. Madam Chair, are you still with us?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Madam Chair. And I believe I hear Director Deere as well.
You do.
Great.
If it pleases the chair, we're ready to move on to item B under your information calendar. And for this, we have our legislative update. I'll be kicking it off and then handing it off to Matt Vey. I'll do the state portion and then he'll handle the federal affairs. The state legislative portion begins on packet page 12. And I think it's most important to understand where we are in the current legislative session. The California State Legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate, have returned to Sacramento after the summer recess. And as such, they are now beginning the process of working towards rectifying all of the appropriation bills, whether they go on suspense or whether they pass out, so that ultimately the legislature can take action on any bill that has made it through that legislative gauntlet. It's important to note that we have roughly 700 bills placed on the suspense file in both the Assembly and the State Senate. As such, the Appropriations Committee is working hard to rectify that and get bills out so they can be heard on the appropriate floors, and then, of course, be reconciled by the appropriate House after that's done. Ultimately, currently, there's 1,260 bills remaining on file. So there's quite a bit of work to be done. As part of their return to the state capitol, the governor did urge specific action on major climate legislation, asking both houses to pass these bills prior to the end of the legislative session. He's asked that these bills focus on reducing and eliminating fracking in the state of California, passing carbon neutrality, expanding clean energy, supporting carbon sequestration legislation, and of course, handling or taking on some of the issues that could be provided or seen through the rolling blackouts as the state of California deals with record-setting heat and also diminishing and reduced power. I think most of you had the opportunity to hear from the governor, whether it be through social media or through the news, but ultimately the governor did take specific action on August 11th, so just late last week. We were able to have our legislative analyst, Neomel Pappas and Associates, update this memo to provide the most up-to-date information. Governor Newsom did announce specific drought action related to California water supply strategy, and this is adapting to a hotter and drier future. He's made specific directives as far as these matters go. He's asked that we invest in new water supply. He's asked that we accelerate current projects. He's asked that we create new storage in the state of California, recycle 800,000 acre feet per year, which is a significant step up as far as maximizing the use of recycled water. He's asked that we eliminate water waste, and this is something that you've seen from the State Water Resources Control Board in each of the last several droughts. It's one of the first actions that they take, and I see that it is slowly becoming part of the communities that we serve, so we're happy to see that. And then last but not least, the governor has directed specific investments in stormwater and desalination. And if you had a chance to watch the press event that he held, you know, it's important to note that these water supplies, both stormwater and desalination, have a very specific element within the strategy. It is part of the future portfolio as it was under Governor Brown. So we're very pleased to see this because we do believe that California should be operating with all the tools in the toolbox, if you will. And I wanted to point out two specific items within the governor's strategy. First is, the calling out of two very specific projects that are near and dear to West Basin Municipal Water District, but also the region. He specifically highlighted the Hyperion 2035 project, as well as Metropolitan Water District's Pure Water Southern California. This is crucial for West Basin Municipal Water District because it would provide significant supplies to the region, our partners, and West Basin Municipal Water District. According to the governor, he sees that these projects are ready to move forward and he would like to see them expedited. And then the second piece of this is the selection of an infrastructure czar. And Governor Newsom did appoint Antonio Villaraigosa. You might recall the former mayor of Los Angeles, but also the former speaker of the California State Assembly to lead this effort. I think that from the perspective of those within the industry, it would be great to have somebody with a singular focus when it comes to these programs and projects. And obviously, Antonio Villaraigosa has a very specific knowledge of LA County, the city of Los Angeles, and even the Metropolitan Water District service area. So we believe that this is great news. If you turn to packet page 13, I want to run through some bills real quick and just highlight several specific bills that we've been working on just to provide you that overview. And again, I want to repeat that as bills flow through the legislative calendar and through the process, they ultimately, if there's a price tag of approximately $150,000, those bills go through appropriations and ultimately end up on what's called the suspense file. This is part of that legislative process that can keep bills from reaching that finish line. So we always try to track these, especially as they get through appropriations. So the first bill I want to highlight is Senate Bill 230 by Senator Portantino. This bill is related to State Water Resources Control Board constituents of emerging concern in drinking water program. This bill was sponsored by Metropolitan Water District. West Basin has had a support position on it since it was introduced. The bill was removed from Assembly Appropriations with amendments to clarify around the CEC Action Fund, ensure that nothing in the bill shall duplicate or change existing work on PFAS. So we'll continue to work on that bill with Kathy Viatella at Metropolitan Water District, and we'll provide additional updates later next month. Assembly Bill 1845 by Assemblymember Calderon. This bill is related to Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, alternative project delivery methods. This bill did pass out of appropriations and it is now headed to the Senate floor. And I point this out, West Basin does have a support position on it. The bill would authorize Metropolitan Water District to use the design build procurement process. This is crucial as far as expediting Metropolitan Water District's Pure Water Southern California project. And so we're very pleased to see this move forward. The next bill I wanted to highlight is Assembly Bill 1655 by Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer. This bill is related to state holidays and the Juneteenth holiday. As you recall, West Basin's Board of Directors did authorize a support position on this. We have notified all of our legislators, and we are very pleased to see that this bill was passed out of Appropriations Committee with some technical amendments. And of course, this bill would make Juneteenth a state holiday, as was pointed out or added by our federal government last year. So we're excited to see this, despite the fact that some people had some concerns about the potential costs involved. Assembly Bill 2142 by Assemblymember Gabrielle. This is related to income taxes and the exclusion for turf replacement water conservation program rebates. And I'm very excited about this bill. The bill was passed out of Senate Appropriations Committee and now goes to the Senate floor. This is a bill that we've been working on for some time. Most of those in the industry, especially agencies that really push hard on this turf replacement grant rebate, it's great to see that the legislature is finally taking action, and we are hopeful that this bill will be passed ultimately this year. Senate Bill 222 by Senator Dodd related to water rate assistance program. This bill is eligible for a vote on the Assembly floor. So you may recall that last year this bill was introduced ultimately in the legislature, and a great deal of work was put into it by numerous stakeholders within the industry. The bill does have a lot of concern.
Busy on a committee meeting.
And ultimately, the bill did not pass last year, but the bill appears to be moving forward this year. So we're going to continue to track this. Obviously, the Association of California Water Agencies is very involved. Lastly, I think the last bill that I wanted to really highlight was Assembly Bill 2638 by Assemblymember Bloom. This legislation is related to school facilities, drinking water, and water bottle filling stations. You might recall that one of our constituents and stakeholders, Craig Cadwalader, has attended several of our meetings to talk about this bill. West Basin staff has worked closely with him. This bill was placed on the Senate Appropriations Committee suspense file, so we're very excited to see that it has since passed out. I do know that Craig Cadwalader is not joining us today because he is in the Southern Santa Monica Bay Watershed Area Steering Committee, which he currently serves as the chair, but I know that he'd be very pleased to see that this bill has ultimately passed and is moving forward. With that, Madam Chair, I think that covers kind of the where and the what's as far as the legislative calendar, but I am happy to answer any questions that you might have prior to handing it off to our colleague, Matt Bay.
All right, thank you. Thank you, AJ, for the presentation. Are there any questions, board members?
This is Board Member Houston, just real quick, and I wanted to say to Matt while he's here on the last item, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to chime in, but it is a big deal. The Inflation Reduction Act obviously got passed, but also the fact that it had significant funding for Western Water. So obviously that's something that we'll probably talk about in the future as some of those sources of funding get down into our area, but that's really, really significant. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And then secondly, what the governor, of course, just did this past week as well. So I'm very interested in, as those funding mechanisms come along and have opportunities to access it, as well as Villaraigosa's new role and what that might mean for West Basin. Obviously having strategic relationships and dialogue with him at some point. And then let me ask one last question, unless Matt's going to touch on it, I don't know, but there was that bill SB 1157 Hertzberg, the urban water use objectives, indoor residential. Is that still moving along, or what's going on with that particular bill? It seems like I'd heard about it a little not too long ago, but I don't know the latest.
Yes, Director Houston, that legislation has moved forward. It did pass out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee. If you turn to packet page 15, it is included in here. There are several stakeholders that are currently working on the legislation. You might recall that this is in relation to legislation that was previously passed. It was part of the Senate Bill 606 and Assembly Bill 1668, the water use efficiency targets. And it's really important to understand kind of the concept that they're working on here. You might recall that as part of that target, it did provide a 55 gallons per capita per day for residential indoor water usage. And I point that out because I think there's some confusion about that. That ultimately what you will see is a target for each individual water retailer, and it'll include your residential, both indoor 55 GPCD, as well as your outdoor water use for residential. Then it'll include your CII, your commercial, industrial, and institutional, and then it'll provide some water for water loss. And ultimately that'll be your target. And then, of course, each individual retailer can devise a specific strategy to meet their target. So whether that's trying to significantly reduce their indoor residential, your outdoor residential, or your CII, or a combination of all three, that will ultimately be how you meet your target. This legislation would accelerate the decline in GPCD calculations. So that legislation previously had 55 gallons per capita per day. This legislation would reduce that to 47 beginning January 1st of 2025, and then to 50, and then ultimately to 42, which will be begin in January 2030. So I know that there are a lot of stakeholders currently working on this legislation. You see a mix of agencies that are opposed, and then numerous agencies that are opposed unless amended. And then I think some have moved more towards a neutral position. But ultimately, this will just impact your target. West Basin Municipal Water District, right now, we are currently tracking pretty close to our target within the collective West Basin service area. We do that obviously with the use of recycled water, but also groundwater pumped, so we get that credit for our indirect potable reuse. And then, of course, our communities are doing a fairly good job as far as reducing their total demand, and especially their indoor gallons per capita per day. So with that, we feel very confident that all of our retailers are ultimately going to be able to comply with this, but this legislation is continuing to move forward. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, mostly except on the back end. And so right now it is moving forward, but it's still in the discussion as we speak, right? Because this is the August.
Correct. You could see some potential amendments. I know that Senator Hertzberg has expressed his desire to see this across the finish line. He would like to see the industry embrace it, but obviously this is part of a package that was just negotiated a few years back. And so to see it come back again so soon, I think is some of the heartburn that the industry is sharing.
Okay. So long story short is by the end of this month, going to next month, we'll certainly know where things stand, right? When
Correct.
when they work their way through all these bills. Okay, so by next month, you'll probably have another update on it.
Yes, and if we hear sooner, if this bill gets amended, we can always send out an update to the board of directors.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So with that, Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Matt Vey, who will provide the federal affairs update.
All right. Thank you, EJ. So.
Thank you.
Thanks. So directors, I'm now on page 43 of the agenda packet. And I guess I just wanted to mention something that I should have said earlier, but the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, originally the Build Back Better Act had provisions in it where conservation rebates would have been exempt from income. That did not make it into the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, unfortunately, as best we can tell. So right now, we're really hoping that AB 2142 makes it across the finish line so that our customers will be able to get those, at least some relief from the cost of participating in those programs. So I did want to mention that. And then now the issue that I really find fascinating to follow, and it's about the Colorado River. It's something that's really kind of lurked in the background for the last 10 to 15 years, I would say, but it's really coming into the forefront for all of us, and just what's going on there. So there was two major actions on the Colorado River related to the Colorado River yesterday. So as you've probably seen in the media, there's been a lot of coverage of the ongoing negotiations between the 7 Colorado River Basin states on how to reduce, to come up with a plan, how to reduce water use from the river by 2 to 4 million acre feet, which people think it's up to a third of the total, I guess, allocation from the river. So it's a big chunk of water. And again, as you probably read, all recent updates and kind of quotes that have been made public by some of the participants in those negotiations have seemed to indicate that things are not progressing very well. There's not a whole lot of consensus on who's going to make contributions, how much they're going to contribute, and so the whole thing is kind of at risk of federal intervention at this point. The agencies have been given until mid-August, till yesterday really, to come up with a unified plan that everybody agrees to, but so far that hasn't panned out. So in recent days, we've heard the Department of the Interior making remarks that they're continuing to warn the parties that it's ready to step in and implement its own plan for cutbacks, for making those 2 to 4 million acre feet cutbacks. But fast forward through all that to yesterday, and the feds thought they were going to say time's up, but instead of that, instead of implementing their own cuts, they essentially, I don't like to use this term, but they kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit by giving the party some additional time to come to a consensus. And there's no hard and fast deadline that's been established as of yet. They said it could take the rest of this year at least to come to that consensus. And so what the feds did instead is they instituted much smaller water supply cuts to the states of Arizona and Nevada and the country of Mexico. But those were all already agreed to under the 2019 Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan agreement. So under that drought contingency plan, the cuts are on the order of about 721,000 acre feet, which, as you can tell, is much less than the 2 to 4 million acre feet that had been previously discussed. I'll probably say this a couple times, but there's no cuts to California at this time. So in the meantime, the Bureau of Reclamation will continue to develop a work plan to address the situation. They said that it could include defining what constitutes a beneficial use of water in the lower basin states, which would be pretty controversial. They could also look at including evaporative losses as part of the allocation, which is not the case right now, but I think is being utilized in some of the upper basin states. So they've got different ideas out there of what they could do. It's pretty much expected that if the government installs its own plan, that there could be lawsuits, there could be court actions from numerous parties that could hinder the progress further. But hopefully the party will come to an agreement here in the next several months. The other action that happened yesterday, and it's very much intertied with the negotiations, was the release of the Colorado River Basin 24-month study. So this is the annual plan that Bureau of Rec develops to forecast future conditions on the Colorado River, and specifically the elevations at Lake Mead and Lake Powell. The updated study continues to project worsening conditions on the river and dropping water levels at Lakes Mead and Powell. Last year, when they did their update, they had, for Lake Mead, they had forecasted an elevation of 1,067 feet, which was below the 1,075 foot level where the first ever shortage was triggered, and Arizona and Nevada had some cuts this calendar year because of that. So this update that just happened yesterday that was released, so they're now projecting that Lake Mead will finish the end of this year, so January 1 of 2023, to be less than 1,050 feet, but more than 1,045. Less than 1,050 feet is the next shortage level. It's considered shortage level 2A. In 2A, that's where you will see Arizona will take a 21% cut, which is the 592,000 acre feet cut. Nevada will take an 8% cut, which is about 25,000 acre feet. And then Mexico will take a 7% cut, which is about 104,000 acre feet. So those are on top of the cuts. Well, no, those would be a continuation, but even greater cuts than they experienced this year. So again, there's no cuts to California at this time, but there could be some in the near future if things worsen into next year. California's cuts begin at, I guess, shortage level 2B, which is that begins when the water forecast is scheduled to be less than 1,045 feet. So as you can see, I think they're projecting 1,047 feet. So they're just 2 feet away from hitting a point where California would start to be impacted. So we're at a very serious situation here. So again, we're really hoping that those talks will be fruitful and that we'll have a clear path forward. So wanted to update you on that. And then the last thing that I'll mention is late last month, the House passed another omnibus type bill titled the Wildfire Response and Drought Resiliency Act. It includes 48 bills that the House Committee on Natural Resources has considered during the 117th Congress related to drought, water supply, tribal water rights, climate resiliency, and wildfire and environmental justice. So the package does include 2 bills that the West Basin Board of Directors have adopted support positions on. One is HR 1015, which is a bill by Representative Napolitano, her Water Recycling Investment and Improvement Act. You took a support position on this in 2021. It also includes HR 7847, which is the Water Efficiency, Conservation, and Sustainability Act of 2022, and you adopted a support position on that in June, I believe. Some of the other notable provisions of this bill is there's $700 million to continue grant programs for large-scale water recycling and reuse projects. It also removes a 2026 termination date for that. This would apply to Metropolitan's Pure Water program that they're pursuing. There's $500 million to address decreasing water levels at Lake Mead and Lake Powell. $100 million for new grant programs to help disadvantaged communities address declines in drinking water quality and availability. $260 million for desalination project development, $250 million for the Salton Sea, and $25 million to create data grant program funding to support non-federal agencies like West Basin and others to make water data sets accessible and to support data sharing between water agencies. With that, that concludes my federal affairs report, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
The chair there. Director Gray, are you there? No, I see her.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are.
I couldn't.
Okay.
I'm here. I couldn't unmute.
Okay. I just had a quick more of a comment, I think, for this than question.
Okay.
Great, thank you. I just want to say thanks, Matt and EJ both. And honestly, I was a bit confused too, because it looks like the media reports that came out the last couple days, some were saying that the feds had stepped in and were demanding the cuts be made, and some seemed to have that other language in it. So even I got kind of caught off guard. So I think you did a good job articulating that. But yeah, it looks like, just from what I saw, it seemed like folks jumped the gun a bit as to what was really actually going on. So that's going to be interesting how everyone tries to fix that or articulate it. What was I going to say? Just one other thing. I think it's just so dire right now. I am a bit surprised that they're letting them have maybe even up to the end of the year, quite honestly. Of course, things will be changing probably between now and the end of the year, but anyways, it's very dire. We know this. So I think we have to really pay attention to that. And of course, I know Metropolitan will be working on it on our behalf predominantly. And then one last thing, just remind us of the schedule for Congress, because we are, what, the 17th of August? So they're going to be cutting out soon, if not already, but they're cutting out of town pretty quick here, aren't they?
Yeah, I believe that's coming up pretty soon. It's the session isn't quite over yet, but they've got limited time left, I believe.
Okay. Do you know what that is, EJ, or not? Congress.
So I show them returning to the district on the 20, oh, excuse me. Let me see. Yeah, I see them returning to the district actually last week and working primarily from the district through this month. You'll see them return, I think, the first week of September for some committee work and then votes through the month of September.
Okay, got it. And then after that, it's all the way up to the election. Everyone's going to be focused. Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for these reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. And Madam Chair, if it's okay, we can move forward with a third item on
Yes.
the information calendar, which is a presentation
please.
by Tammy Hurley High, who will be providing the Metropolitan Water District update for the month of July.
Thank you, EJ. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, Chair Gray, Member Houston, and Director Deere. This report summarizes recent activities Metropolitan that include the Delta conveyance, the upper feeder emergency shutdown, the water supply and demand conditions. Those are the three main topics. And this information starts on page 48 of the committee packet. So starting with the Delta conveyance, the state of California Department of Water Resources released their draft environmental impact report for the Delta conveyance project on July 27th. And this proposed project is to modernize the conveyance of the water delivery infrastructure in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And the draft EIR includes information on alternatives for the project, potential environmental impacts, and mitigation measures to help avoid or minimize those impacts. And the proposed project describes the option of constructing 2 intake facilities in the northern part of the Delta, along with 1 water conveyance tunnel that would be located underground to bring, and that would bring water to the new intake to the Bethany Reservoir. The proposed infrastructure modernization project follows the Governor Newsom's direction in 2019, as you may recall, of downsizing previous concept for improving the water conveyance in the Delta. And the draft EIR was prepared by the Department of Water Resources, as they are the lead agency to comply with the requirements of CEQA and evaluates a range of alternatives to identify potential environmental effects and mitigation measures. So DWR is accepting public comments on the draft EIR, and there will be 3 virtual public hearings that will be held during the public review process during the month of September. And these are listed in the memo, the dates and the times. So they will be on September 13th, the 22nd, and September 28th. And more information about the project and the draft EIR can be located online at deltaconveyanceproject.com. And moving on to the upper feeder shutdown. So Metropolitan will be performing repair to the upper feeder, as you have already heard and was provided information. We were provided at our last caucus meeting, a very detailed information. And as they described, that pipeline is used to convey water supplies from the Colorado River Aqueduct. And earlier this year, a leak was discovered on the Bellow joint where the pipeline spans the Santa Ana River bridge along the Truss Bridge, and is located in the city of Riverside. And as they had mentioned, temporary repairs were performed, and they built a new joint and accompanying component that were engineered, and they were manufactured by the Metropolitan Water District at their Laverne shop. So this will be installed by an outside contractor to replace the damaged bellows expansion joint. And Metropolitan has requested a voluntary restriction on outdoor watering to residents and businesses receiving source water from the Colorado River supplies for a 15-day period, and this will begin on September 6th. So from September 6th through September 20th. And during this time, the call for additional conservation will not impact member agencies that are located in the State Water Project dependent areas, as they already have their own regulations that they have to comply with pertaining to the Metropolitan imported water supply from the State Water Project. Moving on to the water supply and demand conditions. Currently, the demands for imported water from the Metropolitan Water District, they are forecasted to be more than what the available supplies are. And at the time of this writing, the supply demand gap for the calendar year 2022 was projected to be 629 acre feet. And now the projections indicate a supply demand gap of 546,000 acre feet. And this is because of the increased water conservation activities that have resulted from Metropolitan Water Emergency Declaration a couple of months back. And the good news is that Metropolitan will be able to use withdrawals from the transfer and storage programs. And this, along with the continued decline of water use, these efforts will help to satisfy this gap. For the areas that are dependent on State Water Project supplies, the water use has declined since Metropolitan began their emergency water conservation program at the beginning of June. And agencies have been using a combination of strategies, including increased conservation messaging, rigorous outdoor watering restrictions and enforcement, along with the increased production of their local supply. So as a result, water use in these areas are expected to continue to decrease the region's annual demand on Metropolitan. And member agencies in these State Water Project dependent areas will continue implementing emergency water conservation programs. However, in case these conservation results might not continue, Metropolitan will be prepared to take additional actions, which could include banning all outdoor watering and transitioning all affected agencies to the volumetric limit compliance path. So currently, there are 3 affected agencies that are on a 1-day-a-week watering schedule instead of the volumetric limit compliance option. So the amount of water that can be saved this year, as we know, will also help preserve the critical water supplies for next year. And for Metropolitan, this is important for their supplies that are stored in the intentionally created surplus program. So these supplies can be available if needed, due to the uncertainty of conditions along the Colorado River in 2023. So moving on to the board meeting actions, included in this memo is a list of items that were approved last month in July, along with the respective board member votes. And a list of the draft agenda items for August was not available since they did not have their executive committee meeting last month. And so moving on to the water supply update, at the end of this report includes an attachment with the graphics for the current conditions. And on this page, on the left side, green shaded area for the State Water Project, the Lake Oroville Reservoir is shown is at 42% of total capacity. And for the Colorado River Basin on the right side of the page, the graph showed Lake Powell to be at 26% of capacity and Lake Mead at 27% of capacity with the elevation of 1,040 feet. That was at the time that this report was put together. And then on the second page, just showing the storage reserve for the two watersheds, the State Water Project in the green shaded area, the Oroville Reservoir storage chart indicates 571,000 acre feet of more storage compared to last year. And then the storage in this reservoir is about 1.4 million acre feet, which is about 40% of its total capacity. And for other State Water Project supplies, there's a box here that shows supply during calendar year 2022. Showing that Metropolitan has carryover supplies available estimated at 38,000 acre feet and an additional supply of 133,000 acre feet, which can be used under the Department of Water Resources Human Health and Safety needs. So Metropolitan was granted additional supply from the Department of Water Resources for human health and safety supply earlier this year. And under this agreement, in order for Metropolitan to use these supplies, they must impose mandatory conservation restrictions, and they must also pay back any water borrowed from that allocated supply within 5 years. And so we heard a very comprehensive update on the Colorado River Basin earlier from Matt. So this concludes my update, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Tammy. Are there any questions?
Madam Chair, I don't think I have a question. I know I have a comment really fast, and you did a really thorough job on all this, Tammy and Matt and EJ. I think my only thing, of course, at the exact moment is dealing with the shutdown, which I did see, thankfully, has gotten a lot of attention. As soon as they announced that and got it out, I've just seen it everywhere, as you all have. I am curious if in our own local communities or region, if any of the local papers have reached out asking us anything, or are they just been taking the Metropolitan work and kind of rolling with that?
Yeah, I'm
Georgie?
not. Yeah, go ahead, EJ.
I was just going to say, West Basin has done, I think, a great deal of outreach when it comes to the upper feeder shutdown. Not only did we do a press release, which actually provided the information related to Metropolitan Water District, but we've actually reached out to all of our retailers, and our retailers have done a pretty impressive job of getting the word out. And that's what we were really hoping for, was kind of a grassroots, low kind of financial implication as far as our outreach goes. But we've seen tremendous support from our communities. We've had a handful of phone calls from our municipalities because of the specific news story that was done on at the city of Burbank. So they were on the nightly news, and that really got things moving. But we've been working with Metropolitan Water District closely to kind of get their information out. I have not seen it picked up yet as far as our media, as far as our print media, but I can check with Amy and we can get that back to you as soon as possible.
Okay. I don't need it any sooner, but and of course it'll be probably in the next month's meeting clips and stuff. I was just curious if offhand you guys knew, like, did anybody locally call us or not on this? You know, the one thing I would like to see is, the one thing I would like to see would be if we, oh yeah, are we reaching out to our cities?
We have. So our municipalities actually participate in our quarterly water use efficiency meetings. We actually have one next week. So we've already sent them information so that they could participate. Again, we've had our press release go out with all of our retailers copied. Through that, we've received a lot of phone calls from our municipalities. And then we've been calling a handful that are extremely just very active. So I would say of our 17 municipalities, we've had direct contact with about 13, maybe 14 of those cities as far as our request. And then, of course, we're still getting more calls as things progress. Director Houston, I don't know if we lost you or not. Your video did cut out.
Nope, I'm back. Sorry about that,
Okay.
EJ. I
No
did
worries.
hear you. It was cutting out. Okay, good, because I think that'll be really good. And of course, there's probably going to be more outreach coming, or outreach to us coming as we get closer. So just wanna say thank you and maybe keep the board posted on what does transpire. Okay,
Will do.
great. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? All right, is that the last item, EJ?
It is, Madam Chair. We do have listed on the agenda closed session items, but we do not have any closed session. And then item 8 is director comments or future agenda items.
All right, director's comments, Director Houston?
I don't have any further comments. Just thank you to staff. Really thorough reports. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Deere? All right, is Director Williams on the call also?
He is not,
No.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Director Alvarez?
He's not here as well.
Okay. All right, well, my comments, I want to thank staff, I think Matt, I'm blocking names, excuse me, everyone, Tammy, EJ, and everyone that's been on the call today, and even the earlier meeting. We have such a fantastic staff, and they really do keep things going, and I think we're all appreciative, certainly the board, I do, as well as the other board members recognize that West Basin wouldn't be what it was if we didn't have great staff. So thank you for all the reports this morning, this afternoon, and your continued commitment. So with that, unless there are any future agenda items, Director Houston or anyone have any future agenda items? Or
No, thank you.
okay, and thank you, Director Houston, for your engagement always, and the rest on the line. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Director Houston and Director Deere, and thank you to staff as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.